Welcome to You Make It Happen, the show that discusses trauma healing, travel, food, and everything in between. I'm your host, Missy. On today's episode, we're talking about how trauma relates to travel, a little bit about my story, my background, how I got here, a review of a local boba spot, and of course, you're going to get those travel tips. So for those listening that don't already know, I'm based out of Seattle. I'm a foodie who reviews local eateries, boba places, and more. I travel a shit ton. I'm passing my wealth and breadth of knowledge on to you. And I also have a little bit of trauma healing experience. I have a few excellent recommendations for some self-education throughout the podcast, so strap in and stay tuned. The reason behind the title I'm going to get into in another episode. Suffice it to say, I am someone who has done her share of the work. Self-improvement work, trauma healing work. I know y'all know what I'm talking about. Just some of the topics of this podcast and future episodes are going to be my story of resilience, trauma healing and integration, inner child healing, going from anxious to earned secure attachment, earned, I'll explain that later, self-love, how I got there, travel, tips, tricks, advice, and more. Oh yeah, I didn't leave that out. I didn't forget, come on. Solo travel and how to get comfortable traveling alone, food, and yes, I know that's kind of a broad topic, but believe me, I'm going to get into it. How trauma is stored in our bodies and what we can do about it. Healing from my UBPD mother, and that's an acronym for undiagnosed borderline personality disorder. Healing from my abusive father, and parts work, which is IFS, internal family systems, and everything in between. And everything in between is pretty much all of life. Yeah. So, this is a combination of my stories of recovery, self-love, trauma healing, travel, food, going from anxious to earned secure attachment, and hopefully, just hopefully, how I can help you with your healing path by using my experience and tools. So, I'm going to have guests on, and we will begin to tackle some tough questions which are bouncing around today, some of which are self-care. What does that mean to you? What does your path of trauma healing look like? And also, where do you go for help when therapy just isn't an option? And lots more. So I want to let you guys know up front, here I am. I'm a real person, just like you. I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. I'm not a mental health professional. I am just like you. Someone who has done and continues to do her personal work. So what do I mean by work? Let's elaborate on that a little bit. You hear the phrase, do your personal work. Or a lot of people are asking in dating apps now, are you doing your work? Generally speaking, this is referring to the work of self-improvement, the work of trauma healing, inner child healing in some cases, the work of healing an insecure attachment style, reparenting your inner child, and generally becoming a better version of yourself. You've heard the phrase best self, I'm sure. So what do I mean by a better version? I mean more joyful, more fulfilled, grateful, happier. All the things. This podcast is about my personal healing path, how I got to where I'm at from anxious to earned secure attachment. And oh yes, we are definitely going to be touching on attachment styles in this podcast, just not in this episode. We're also going to be talking about how I became comfortable traveling solo, how I learned to love myself. So this is kind of a melting pot, if you will, of self-love, self-discovery, travel, food, and yeah, trauma healing as it relates to my personal path, and hopefully it relates to yours too. If I can help even one listener by hearing how I came through some really dark times and some even suicidal times as a child and as an adult, then this is going to be well worth it. I'm going to be sharing my story, how I got to where I'm at, which is going from a self-loathing asshole, not somebody I'd be friends with today, mind you. So the people listening that knew me many, many years ago, I am not the same person, let's be clear. Going from that to a self-loving, empathic, kind human being over many years with lots of really hard work. Whether for you, it's wondering how the fuck to start, or if you're already well into therapy, hopefully my stories and my experience helps you along your path. Take what works and leave what doesn't. Like Maya Angelou has prolifically said, when you know better, do better. Let me be the first to say I am not for everyone. I am loud. I'm opinionated. I swear a shit ton. Yes, I get the irony in that. I'm forthright, direct, blunt at times, and I'm definitely not the one to tell you what you want to hear. I am just an ordinary person like you, on her own healing and traveling path, using what tools and tips I've learned along the way. I am in the trenches right here with you, doing the work, doing that hard work. I was anxious for so many years, and I still get triggered. My anxieties come out in a relationship, and I just have better tools to self-soothe and regulate now. So I would say I've done the work, my personal work, but I don't know if we can ever really finish our work. Trauma healing, self-love, self-improvement, and self-care, to me, this is a lifetime process. If you choose to pursue such a brave and courageous path, and if you're listening to this, chances are you have, great work. Working on yourself is not easy. This shit is hard. Doing the hard work of changing how you feel, regulating your emotions, challenging your thoughts, learning to love yourself, and earning secure attachment, holy shit. That is tough fucking work. And if nobody has told you today, let me be the first to say I'm proud of you. Good fucking job. That's incredible. Stepping into this arena, just stepping into it is difficult. And I'll explain the arena analogy later. Lifelong learning is my passion, and becoming a better and better version of myself, someone who lives in her values and not just professes them, that is my goal. So I mentioned it earlier, and we're going to get back into it now, self-care. This is a kind of a hot potato phrase, I think. Ah, yes, self-care. What comes to mind? Because for a lot of people, it's bubble baths, spa days, getting your hair did, nail trips to the salon. Self-care is a term that's getting tossed around a lot lately, and so is self-love. But let's talk about self-care for just a minute. So my definition is a little bit more nuanced and a lot more fucking work. I saw some meme, or was it a graphic? I don't know. It was a picture of an iceberg on social media, and it said the, quote, self-care iceberg. And I'm going to read to you what it enumerated in the picture. What we think self-care looks like: exercise, skincare, massages, spa days. That was on the top of the iceberg. On the bottom part, it says what self-care really looks like behind the scenes: inner child healing, trauma therapy, purging negativity, therapy, crying / feeling emotions, setting boundaries, getting proper rest, letting go of unhealthy attachments, meditation, difficult conversations, learning from triggers, and nourishing your body. Whoa, that one hit. At least it did for me. This list is by no means exhaustive, but I thought it was a really good illustration of what we typically think of when we talk about self-care, and then what self-care ideally would be. I think the iceberg is an apt metaphor because all the shit you can't see on the surface is the stuff that's the deeper, harder work, making a huge difference in daily life. The portion underneath the surface of the water is what ultimately holds you up. People can only see what you show them. They can only see the part that sticks out of the water, but we all know icebergs are legendarily massive, carrying most of their enormity under the surface. So, what does self-care mean to you? Right? Hit me on social, follow the Make It Happen podcast page on Facebook, and I'll be happy to answer your questions as best as I can in a future episode. All right, we're going to do a little bit of a pivot and get to a topic that I have been advertising, which is how does trauma relate to travel? I know, it sounds like they would have nothing to do with one another. So, but first, let me ask, where do you like to travel? Do you like to travel alone? I'm getting there, I promise. If you like to travel alone, why do you think that is? If you're afraid to travel alone, why do you think that is? Now we're starting to see a link here. I've been traveling alone for almost 2 decades now, and it took a lot of courage and vulnerability for me to take the first steps. The first time I did it, it was scary, intimidating. I was anxious and worried. I didn't know if I'd be able to do it. I didn't know if I could navigate on my own. I didn't know if I could be alone. I don't know if I would literally survive. And yes, I get that sounds dramatic, but that's how I felt the first time I took a solo trip outside of the United States. Spoiler alert, I survived. Obviously, here to make this podcast. However, it was uncomfortable sitting with myself alone without company or anyone to talk to. But I did that a lot at home anyway, so I figured, shit, let's give it a shot. At least I'll go see some new shit, try some new food. After I put in a lot of trauma work and a lot of self-care, self-love, healing, all the things, it made a world of difference when I traveled. Now I travel comfortably and confidently solo, just as much as I travel comfortably and confidently with a partner or friend. So, all right, I promised you, and it's here. What does traveling have to do with trauma? And if you're thinking, where the fuck are the tips? I'm getting to those. I promise. They're going to be here. Trauma-informed care, healing, self-love, autonomy. Well, I think it's everything. I think they have everything to do with each other. I believe from everything I've read, learned, and experienced, both in and out of therapy, our trauma, our childhood core wounds, shapes who we are and dictates our level of comfort and vulnerability with traveling and everything else in life. So let me ask you, have you got health problems you can't explain? Unfounded aches, pains, autoimmune disorder? I know I sound like a 90s infomercial. I promise I'm going to make a point here. It's more than likely trauma. Unaddressed, unhealed, unintegrated, repressed. Yep, trauma. Let's say for argument's sake, you don't see yourself as having any childhood trauma. Okay, I'm going to say that's impossible. But for the sake of argument, hey, we're going to go with that for right now. You likely still have repressed emotions, bottled up feelings of anger, sadness, grief, anguish, pain, suffering. The list goes on. Basically, it's shit you haven't dealt with. Hey, I get it. I was you. A walking, talking, barely functioning ball of rage, depression, frustration, anguish, pain, self-loathing, desperation, and that's just to name a few. So what did I do about it? Well, I'll tell you what I didn't do about it. I didn't kill myself. I went to therapy. I got incredibly lucky by getting an amazing trauma-informed therapist. A surprising number of them aren't even trained in trauma. Like, who the fuck knew that? Okay, anyway. And I started doing the work on myself, and with my therapist to be a better version of myself. And to just not be fucking miserable. I mean, my goal initially was just to get out of a dark pit. So what the fuck does trauma healing mean? To me, it means a lot of different things. It means learning who you are, what you want, what you stand for. In other words, your values, where you're going in life, what matters to you. Identifying your past traumas and working on integrating them to become more healed and whole. It encompasses a lot. Can we ever fully heal from trauma? A lot of mental health professionals would argue no, we can't. And I'm sure there's probably plenty that argue the opposite, that we can. I think we can integrate our traumas and learn from them and become more whole and wholehearted, more joyful, and experience more happiness as humans if we process our shit, mostly from childhood, if I'm being honest. Or is that just me? Maybe it's just me. You write and tell me. And work to heal ourselves in general, not necessarily fix or resolve our trauma, because the trauma is never going to go away. Once it happened, it happened. And you either have to learn to deal with it, process it, or it's going to deal with you. So this segues into one of my idols here, Brené Brown. She has just been life-changing and revolutionary in the work I've done on myself. Brené Brown was a turning point for me. Reading all of her work at least twice, if not more, as well as watching her Netflix special and her HBO special on repeat, just entirely changed who I am as a human being. So at this point, I hear you, or at least I think I hear you, because if I were you and it was me a few years ago, what I'd be saying or thinking is, what the fuck? I can't find a good therapist, or I can't afford therapy, or how the hell does one even get therapy? There are a lot of resources out there, and I'm aware that the resources have been tapped, if not maxed out, because of COVID. And we're still just coming out of the pandemic, and the long-term effects of the strain on our mental health system are probably going to be in effect for years, unfortunately. But, and there's a big but there. I like big buts, and I cannot lie. That doesn't mean that there aren't excellent resources, and a lot of them are free. Your local library being one of the best resources available. And I'm going to get into book recommendations shortly. My recommendations depend on where you're at in your recovery and trauma integration, whether it's never having started therapy, just curious about what feeling better every day might be like, whether you're a therapy expert, you've been in it longer than me, or you have no idea where to start. But before we get into that, what trauma is holding you back from becoming the real you? What emotions have you been repressing? Why do you struggle to sit with yourself in quiet reflection or just silent meditation? Or if you don't struggle in any of these areas, then great. You've probably done a lot of work on yourself and you should be insanely proud. Do you feel like you're anxiously attached, avoidant attached, or disorganized, fearful avoidant? Here and in future episodes, I'm going to be telling you about how I went from anxious to earn secure, how I manage my emotions when I get triggered and feel anxious now, and how you can manage your anxieties around travel and specifically solo travel, and just anxiety in general, because it all relates. So, let's talk about the intersection of travel and shame resilience, expanding your experiences with yourself to build self-love, self-confidence, self-acceptance, self-compassion, more important than you think, and more. So where have you wanted to travel but you haven't gone? What stops you? If you dig deep and acknowledge an unpleasant truth, are you afraid to be alone with yourself? I used to be terrified of traveling alone. I used to be so afraid. So I just wouldn't travel. I would let my fears and insecurities and anxieties stop me. Now I've been to almost 24 countries, 23, 24. I don't know. I got to check the list. And counting, almost exclusively solo. So getting back to self-love. What is self-love? And how the fuck do I get there? Why isn't this easier? Why do I need to go to therapy? Can't I do this on my own? Well, I couldn't, but now that I've done a lot of work outside of therapy, I do think it's possible to make some serious progress on yourself with dedication, perseverance, and most of all, a growth mindset. You have to be willing to put in the work, and it is work. And if you're not willing, this is not the right podcast for you. If you're not interested, this is not the right podcast for you. Yes, there's going to be travel tips and tricks and advice, but it's primarily going to be travel, how it benefited my life, how it helped me with shame resilience, and how that intersects trauma healing. So, what do I need to do? Everyone's different, and not everyone has access to a therapist, let alone a good therapist. However, there's so much life-changing material that can entirely shift how you see the world and yourself. You just have to know where to look, my friends, and I am here to help you with that. All right, here it is, as promised. This episode's recommended reading is What Happened to You by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. I read this and it shifted how I look at other humans permanently. It was that big of a deal. Whenever someone said something to me or did something that offended me, hurt me, or otherwise really upset me, I used to think and sometimes even say, the fuck is wrong with you? And yeah, I know you can hear it in your head going, oh yeah, I've said that or I've thought that a million times. So after reading that book, my rhetorical question changed to, what happened to you? And the question became no longer rhetorical. So I'm going to tell you a little side story. It's related. Just recently, after returning from a trip, I found myself numbing and dopamine seeking with my favorite mechanisms, TV and food. I've been finding myself in discomfort, not knowing why. I used my tools, my DBT skills, self-soothing and validation, and inner child work. And I also asked myself, what do I need in this moment? Do I need a hug? Then I give myself a hug. And yes, you can give yourself a hug. Do I need emotional validation? I validate myself by acknowledging my emotions are valid. Acknowledge, allow, and understand. A DBT tactic my therapist taught me. And wow, after a lot of practice, that is exceptionally helpful. Now I've reached a level past the acknowledge, allow, understand practice, which I'll get into in later episodes. But even when I don't know the reason why behind some of my emotions, I am still able to self-soothe. I do still struggle with not knowing why, and my therapist is great at helping me discover why, which really helps my healing process, sitting in the discomfort and learning how to be uncomfortable. I know a lot of people that choose to numb out with medications, alcohol, drugs, shopping, sex addiction, porn. They're filling the void, or they're trying to fill the void, and or get the dopamine they're desperately seeking. Most people have been through childhood trauma. Everyone numbs. It's a matter of to what degree and with what. Some choose nothing but numbing and or denial. Some choose therapy and self-acceptance. Some still deny they even have any mental health issues. Those are often people with serious personality disorders, and shaming them, blaming them, berating them, badgering them, or otherwise trying to trick them into getting help, it just won't work. And it's only going to serve to frustrate and infuriate you. So here's where I give you a tiny little snippet of some of my trauma and history. Trigger warning, sexual assault, horrific trauma, elder abuse. All right, suitable pause so those who don't want to hear this shit can turn it off or skip past it. My mother, case in point, she is UBPD, which is undiagnosed borderline personality disorder. She was horrifically abused as a child by her mother, her father, her uncle, and God only knows who else. So she in turn abused her kids. me and my half-brother, who unsurprisingly turned out to be a psychopath. He is serving time in prison for 13 felonies, 12 of which were sexual assault, of whom our mother was the victim. Yeah, I did tell you it was a trigger warning. So it came as no surprise to me after I realized with my self-education about BPD, as well as the help of approximately 7 therapists in, quote, not diagnosing my mother with UBPD, that she raised a psychopath. So I was almost diagnosed with BPD myself after exhibiting many of the traits of the personality disorder when I first started attending therapy. After reading a small library of books about BPD and consulting a multitude of therapists, I am absolutely confident in my body, mind, and spirit that she has this pervasive personality disorder. I really try not to beat myself up for not seeing it sooner, but there were signs all along. Hindsight being 2020, it particularly became more noticeable since my father died in 2007. Her mental health started becoming unstable, and it started going up and down with bouts of verbal abuse, nonsensical tirades, general instability in between periods of normalcy. At first, the periods of normalcy were far greater than the periods of instability, and the instances of abuse were pretty infrequent, maybe once or twice a year. And then as time went on, the nonsensical thought patterns, instability, and abuse grew more and more frequent. So when I say mental instability, I don't mean she was wondering what day it was or experiencing Alzheimer's symptoms. Her instability took the form of changing her stories about things that had happened in the past. In other words, she was rewriting history. That was just one symptom of her mental instability at that time. So many years after my father died, the abuse became much more prevalent than it ever had been in the past, and I stopped speaking to her when she decided to take her anger against me out on my innocent dog by way of not allowing him to go outside to go to the bathroom when she'd previously promised to let him out. She had been taking care of him for a few weeks while I was working on finding a more permanent solution while I was at work in emergency services. I worked as a dispatcher for police, fire, and EMS at the time. In this case, I was working a 12-hour shift, and when someone takes their pain and anger out on an innocent animal or child, for me, that crosses a line. At that time, I didn't ever think she would be capable of animal cruelty as retaliation just because she was mad at me. But little did I know. So for my own well-being, I reevaluated my relationship with her and decided it was not in my best interest to maintain contact. This was many years ago. Mind you, this is before I had done any work on myself or had any inkling she might have a serious personality disorder. I just knew in my heart that something was very wrong, horribly off, and it went along with the same shitty behavior I had seen from her, albeit intermittently, in the years leading up to that event. So, that was a lot of heavy. We're going to do a massive pivot now and talk about one of my other passions, other than trauma healing, which is food. Oh my fucking God, I am a massive boba fan, and some of my favorite teas are here locally in Seattle. And they're not just teas, it's drinks too. So let's talk adventures in boba tea. I like this location, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars in general, and I believe I did on Yelp. I've tried 2 different drinks on 2 different occasions, and the only thing that really soured me on this place and took away one of their stars was the customer service, or rather, lack thereof. The first time I came in, I ordered a lychee dragon fruit green tea with no boba. I wanted to try the drink on its own and test the flavor without having the boba to unduly influence the flavor and texture, because that shit's just awesome in nearly everything. Unless you really fuck up boba, which fortunately they didn't, because I had another drink later on another visit. Because with boba, I mean, nearly anything is going to be delicious, with the exception of maybe grapefruit. Blech. I'm not a huge fan of grapefruit, but it actually relates back to more childhood trauma. Look at that, full circle, if you can believe it. My mother forced me to eat grapefruit when I was a child. I did not like it. I hated it. And so it created a traumatic childhood experience, albeit minor, yet again, of my mother forcing me to eat something that I didn't want to eat. So I know the whole point of this section was to get away from the heavy, so let's get back into the boba. The lychee dragon fruit green tea was pretty good. If you've ever had anything dragon fruit flavored, you know it's a pretty subtle, if not indiscernible flavor. So this was good. I could mostly taste the lychee and jasmine in the green tea, which is to be expected, and I thought it was decent. I ended up paying close to $10 for the drink with tax and tip. That seemed a little bit much, but I guess maybe it's because I put too much of a tip in. Overall, this place has average prices between $6 and $8 approximately per drink for your average boba tea or similar creation. So my second drink here was a day or two later, It was the creme brulee specialty, and it was very tasty. It was a little rich for a drink. I'd call it more like a dessert, but yummy. Those are my general thoughts on Miss Boba. I will return, but it's not typically my first choice. So we're going to do another pivot now and get into the travel tips. I know you've been waiting for it. Travel tips. Let's talk about how you can save money and travel on a budget. Travel tip number 1, airfare. If you want low-cost airfare, it is best to watch it 6 to 8 months in advance. Keep an eye on things. I found in my personal experience that buying 6 months in advance is usually the cheapest price. I emphasize usually because just a couple days ago, I found round-trip airfare to Ecuador for $500. Ecuador. And to the Galapagos for a couple hundred more. Generally, when I watch airfare this far in advance, I can typically get round-trip airfare to Paris or London or Ireland for $400 to $500 as long as I fly during non-peak times. However, there are exceptions to every rule. Sometimes I actually go over Christmas and still get round-trip airfare to London or Paris for $400 to $500. I usually keep an eye on it in June and buy sometime before August, and I'm able to still secure tickets for that price range. I usually try not to fly within 3 to 5 days of Christmas to make sure that I'm not paying the premium rates. I have flown back on the 29th or even the 28th and still managed to get round-trip airfare for $500 to London the last time I went. Your second travel tip, use low-budget European airlines to hop around between countries in Europe. Definitely find whatever city is the cheapest to fly into, whether it's London, Paris, Dublin, whatever. Buy the round-trip tickets there, and then I like using low-budget airlines in Europe to hop on over to different countries or cities that I plan on visiting because you save a ton of money. And taking a carry-on and knowing the baggage requirements in advance for the low-budget airlines like EasyJet and Ryanair will save you a lot in the short term. It's usually worthwhile because there was one instance where I paid $17 for airfare from London to Stockholm. $17. And that included my carry-on. Yeah, it's not quite that cheap anymore, but it's still pretty damn cheap. I think I recently paid $60 for a flight with Ryanair from Portugal to Greece. And your third travel tip, if you want to save money on airfare, buy during non-peak times. I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes people don't think of it, so it's a tip. Don't buy during spring break, winter break, etc. Usually not over Christmas, although sometimes I find deals for that. Watch the prices. Watch your favorite airlines for sales. Sign up for alerts from your favorite search engine. I like Kayak, but you can use whatever you want. And then put in alerts if you're looking for specific dates or specific location. And your final travel tip for this episode. If you can be flexible with your dates, if you don't care when you go or have a lot of flexibility in your schedule, you're going to save way more. For instance, just a few days ago, I put into a search engine, let's go anywhere in the world, anytime. And Kayak lets you do that. And it showed me all over the world. I can scroll and pan the map and look at different destinations and see how much round-trip airfare would be from Seattle. And it'll even show me what month is ideal. So I found round-trip airfare to Ecuador for $500 in October. Oh yeah, that's definitely happening. Had to jump on that right away. So, in closing, I hope you enjoyed the first episode, and I'm going to give you a little quote, which I plan on ending every episode with, and this is my creation, but it's in part derived from Brene Brown's quote, who said, "Stop working your shit out on other people." I love that. So, as always, love thyself, know thyself, work your shit out, not on other people. If you have questions you would like me to address or have any questions about today's episode, hit me up on social. I am missy.traveler on TikTok and You Make It Happen podcast on Facebook. I look forward to your questions. And please, if you appreciate this podcast and you think it's worth 5 stars, rate it on Spotify or Apple or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.